sage Vasishta has been sitting in samadhi for 100 years. And when he came out of samadhi, the goblins of I and you reached him again, reached him slowly. They seeped in to his psyche once again. And desire entered his heart. Vasishta knew all that there was to be known. He was an accomplished sage, and he'd been sitting in samadhi for 100 years. And Rama asks, "O sage, how is it that even in the case of a person who is established in nirvana, the egosense could thus arise?" The traditional idea that we've got is the ego is conquered, destroyed, and you sit in unexcelled bliss when you're enlightened. But it's not like that at all. The ego sense never goes away. What vanishes or what diminishes is our identification with it. So let's see what Vasishta says. Vasishta replied, "Whether one is a knower of the truth or ignorant of it, without the ego sense the body cannot exist. That which needs to be sustained cannot exist without a support. But there is a vital difference which I shall presently explain to you." So here the body is given the benefit of an actual entity, which is the yogic assumption that the body is real. We've been told often enough that the body is a notional thing. But if you're caught up in yoga, then you tend to take the body as real. But the point here is not just the body. If you're going to communicate at all, then there needs to be an ego sense. We need to be able to use concepts. We need to be able to interact. We need to get on with things. So if the body is simply understood as interaction and engagement with the world, with objects and with others in the world, then there's an ego sense. The little boy, known as ignorance, has created this goblin known as ego sense, which seems to exist within oneself unperceived. This ignorance is a non-entity too, because it is not seen to exist when investigated. Darkness does not exist when it is seen with the help of a lamp. When one looks for this goblin known as ignorance, it does not exist. So when you're looking, when you're investigating, the light of awareness is on. You're established in the realization of your own consciousness. So there cannot be any ignorance. But in the absence of such investigation, when it is taken for granted and when one is under its influence, it expands and gets established. The world is created by that ignorance, which is real only to the ignorant. It is not real. Again, the world isn't created as such. The belief in the notions that we've got about an external world become consolidated to the extent that we don't even realize that they are assumptions and that they are notions. We believe that there's a world out there and end of story. But it is a story, and we should look into the truth behind that story. That which is beyond the mind and the senses cannot be the seed nor the cause for the coming into being of that which is the object of the mind and the senses. When there is no seed, how can there be a sprout? It's sometimes said that consciousness, which is infinite in nature, gives rise to the external world, but it doesn't. It gives rise to notions, and it gives rise to identification with these notions. But once it realizes itself, it doesn't do that anymore. Or once it realizes itself, it no longer needs to start believing in its own notions. It no longer needs to continue believing in its own notions. In the infinite consciousness, it is a mere fancy that appears to be the created universe. This consciousness alone is known as Ishvara, or God, and also as this creation. Ishvara is another word for that self which underpins everything. It can be taken as identical with Brahman. It is like one's own dream creation, which is everybody's daily experience. In a dream, there are lots of entities in it that have no obvious connection with ourself. There might be people in the dream that you interact with, people that you've never met before. They seem to have some kind of independent existence, don't they? And yet it's all your dream. Very often what's going on in the dream is unpleasant. We might not like it. Which is very strange, because it's my dream, isn't it? It's my dream, so why is there things going on in my dream which I don't like? We can get psychoanalytic theories about this, but it is a very peculiar situation, isn't it? When you've got the possibility of being able to dream anything you like, absolutely anything you like, that we might dream that we're walking naked down the high street, or sitting on a toilet somewhere in full view. Why aren't our dreams full of divine bliss? For the very same reason that our everyday life is not full of divine bliss. Because the dreamer is a conscious being, the dream objects appear to have an intelligence and a mind of their own. Even so, this non-creation known as the universe seems to possess independent existence and intelligence, as if it had been created. So in a dream, it's not your consciousness which is at work. All the psychoanalytic theories aside, it is not your consciousness, it's simply consciousness at work. You are as much a dream object as anything else in the dream. You identify with notions of yourself, but it's all consciousness, whether we're awake or whether we're asleep. It's all consciousness doing its thing. There is no creation as such. The one Brahman exists as Brahman. Brahman is consciousness. Whatever notion arises in this Brahman is experienced by Brahman as if it were an object of experience. That Brahman itself fancies that all this is creation. But then the experiencer, experiencing, and experience are one and indivisible. Even so, Brahman, the notion of creation, and creation are only Brahman. Such being the case, how can egosense, or the false notion of I, arise? Well, there are only notions. We don't need to worry about whether a notion is true or false. What we need to worry about is the extent to which we identify with it, the extent to which we believe that it's true. Thus have I told you how to lay this ghost of egosense, which vanishes on being rightly understood. The egosense has thus been clearly understood by me. Hence, even though the egosense seems to arise in me, it is inoperative, like a painting of fire. Thus have I abandoned the egosense. I exist in space as if outside it, in creation as if out of it. I do not belong to the egosense, nor does it belong to me or exist in me. I am not, nor is there another in my vision. All is and nothing is. All is and nothing is. So the ego sense is always there, the notion of a personal identity. It's a question to what extent you feel you have to give that notion validity. And the thing is to step aside from it altogether and realize the essential nature of consciousness.